Because of differences in analytic and holistic thinking, you find that um, East Asians and Westerners tend to have differences in the way that they reason as well. In general, analytic reasoners are more likely to be abstract principles. Let's say it was a dog and a rabbit are both animals, whereas holistic thinkers are more likely to reason differently. That is to say, they would see the relationship between rabbits and carrots and think they belong together simply because that's how the relationship works. So you find that in this ideal, here's two different some objects here where they're checking reasoning styles. And what they find here, it pits associative and rule-based reasoning. And what you find here is there's these two target objects, and the question is where do they belong? And when you see these different groupings or groups that they could potentially belong to, you find that on the left side, there's, oh my gosh, what do they have? Three, three of those, two of those, curved stems, etc. Okay. And so what you find is an analytic reasoner says that A goes with group two and B goes with group one. And the logic is that the only characteristic that completely and utterly describes group one is a curved stem. And the only thing that completely describes group two is a straight stem. And therefore, because that is the only defining characteristic that could possibly be there, that must be the one that it should be categorized. East Asian thinkers or more holistic thinkers are going to be the, oh, well, that's true that the curved stem is the only defining object. But if you take a look, it's pretty darn clear that the flowers in group one have a whole lot more in common with A than it does with B because it's got the, the majority of the flowers in group one have large petals and the majority in the group one have the leaf and the majority of group one do not have a center circle. So when it comes to more of a holistic view, it's sensible to say, flower A belongs in group one. So these cultural differences are pretty clear, and as you can see here in this graph, Euro Americans are pretty clear that they use rule-based reasoning. But what you find is East Asians on the far right side are much more likely to use this, more holistic or similarity reasoning, whereas Asian Americans fall somewhere in the middle, okay, somewhere in the middle between the two. And so where does it come from? Clearly, yes. If you know Plato, Plato argued that he argued the theory of the forms, basically the idea that in the heavens there are perfect forms, like a perfect dog or something like that. And it was his way, it's a larger part of a philosophical argument, but it was his way of getting past this idea that, what is a dog is not a simple question to ask because every single dog is different. Because in the heavens, they're different. There is a perfect dog, a perfect cat, a perfect chicken, a perfect rooster, or I guess rooster is chicken. And so, there's these distinct categories, differences. Eastern intellectual reasoning goes back to Confucian, Buddhist, Taoist, depending on where you're at. And they have much, much, much more holistic thinking. And they absolutely right from the beginning. They describe individuals as an integral part of a community rather than as individual people. So there's many, many, many historical backgrounds to where these reasoning styles comes from. But at the same time, these earlier philosophical traditions lead to differences in acceptance of contradiction. That is, East Asia, no, here, Aristotle, as from a Western perspective, he proposed the basic rules that of mathematics, right? I mean, A equals A, the law of identity. A equals B or A equals not B. There is only two possibilities. The law of non-contradiction. The opposite of A is not A. It's just he put this straightforward. There cannot be contradiction. The world is or it is not. Okay. From an East Asian perspective, they basically have much of their thinking. I mean, the yin and the yang, as symbolized, would be a very good example of it. That you cannot have lightness without darkness. That the two must exist. That is, Westerners tend to view time as linear. All right, whereas East Asians might think of it as more of a circular or circular functioning thing. And so it's just a very radically different way about thinking about what can possibly be.